So today's Torah portion is loaded. There are so many interesting and stories in this week's Torah portion. It's hard to know which one to tackle, which one to analyze. So first I want to give a brief synopsis of the Torah portion, and then we'll delve into a few of the stories because, like I said, there's so many interesting and even controversial stories or questionable stories that you could really need to analyze in this week's Torah portion. So a guy goes into Barnes and Nobles and he says to the sales clerk, "I'm looking for the self-help section. Where is it?" She says, "Well, I can't tell you." He says, "Why?" He says, "It would defeat the purpose." So this week's Torah portion opens up with God had told Abraham at age 99 to circumcise himself. To circumcise himself at age 99. And of course, Abraham, without question, performs a circumcision on himself. And God makes the biggest heat wave in American history, or excuse me, in Israel history, so that nobody would come to Abraham's tent for hospitality. We all know that he was known for his hospitality. That was his curriculum vitae, that he would invite people into his tent, and that's how he brought people closer to monotheism. But Avram, instead of staying in bed, is sitting outside. And a fascinating thing happens in the opening words. Vayeira, God comes to visit Abraham. And Rashi, the famous literal commentary, says, God visits Avram when he's ill, when he's recovering, teaching us the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim, the mitzvah of visiting the sick. That not only God tells us to do mitzvahs, God does the mitzvah too. So God appears to Abraham, and Abraham is a little bit aggravated because there's no guests, there's no travelers passing by. And his whole energy was getting travelers to come in the tent, teaching them about God and monotheism and living a moral, ethical life. So Avram is a little aggravated. God is visiting with him. And suddenly, in the distance, he sees three men coming towards the tent. So he says to God, this is very fascinating, "God, could you wait a minute with all due respect? But there are some people coming my way. I have to leave you for," and now it's flabbergasting if you think about it. Imagine God comes to visit you, Margaret, Jane, and you had a circumcision, well, not, you had something. And God is at your door, conversing with you, unbelievable. And suddenly, the doorbell rings and you say, "Excuse me, God, I have to go for 1 second and see my door because I'm expecting, I don't know if I'm expecting guests, but there are three men coming my way." Now remember, Avram doesn't know they're angels. So the Torah thinks about this and says, like, what is going on? Is this a disrespect to God, that God comes to visit him and now he's taking off? He said, "Excuse me, God, wait a minute." It's rude almost. But herein define something really, really beautiful. I think it's beautiful that every man and woman is created in God's image. By Avram going and telling God, "Hold on a minute, I'll be right back. I have to take care of potential guests." It is actually not at all disrespectful to God. It gave God the greatest joy knowing that Abraham embraces those who are created in God's image. It's the greatest respect for God and the greatest compliment to God that Abraham realizes his mission and the importance of this being in this universe. And many times people say, "I'm busy praying, I'm busy studying, I'm busy doing my spiritual journey," and they don't have time for anybody else. There's a disregard for your neighbor, for your friend, for your family. "I'm a holy roller. I cannot take away from my spiritual endeavors to make room for you in my life. Is that what God wants? So, and instead of feeling God is insulted, God is like, wow, he understands what I want out of this universe. By embracing the guest, you're embracing me. The greatest gift you can give me is by actualizing why I put you into this world. So here, the Torah is giving us a beautiful analysis that rather than saying, oh, look at the disrespect, God is in his living room and he's going to see where someone else is, it's the greatest gift to God that Abraham prioritized humanity in a sense, because really by prioritizing the humanity, you're prioritizing God. And we see, because Avram comes back later to continue the conversation, which is about the destruction of Sodom. God isn't telling Avram, you know, I have to destroy these 4 cities of corrupt people. So Avram has a whole debate with God. Remember, he says, if I find 50 righteous, will you not destroy? He looks, there's no 50 righteous. If I find 40 righteous, 30 righteous, 10 righteous. He couldn't find enough righteous people to prevent God from destroying Sodom. So God, if God was in a huff, God would say, he's ignoring me, off I go. Go there. But and also, it's not like Avram is going to greet the guests, to invest in the stock market, or discuss a decorating project. He's there to bring them closer to God, bring them into the tent, feed them, talk to them, and then say, you know, everything comes from God. So here we see a magnificent thing. First of all, God visiting Abraham. Wow. Bikacholim. 2, how Abraham realizes what his mission is. 3 people coming in the hot desert, I got to invite them into my air-conditioned tent and give them to eat. And another beautiful insight here, and we'll discuss what happens with the angels because it's very important to the story and to understanding, is that when they leave, I want to read you this. And it says that when they left, he planted an ashel, and then he called in the name of the Lord, and the men arose from there, and Avram went with them to escort them. The Torah ends the story of the angels that Avram walks them out to the door and sends them peacefully on their way. And herein lies another magnificent insight, that the Torah emphasizes this line, that many times we're hospitable. You're hospitable, you have guests, you have friends over, but the key element is not only the hospitality during the dinner or during the event or during the luncheon, it's escorting your guests out and saying to them, we loved having you. You know where I live now. I hope you'll come back anytime. The Torah says this is even more important than the hospitality, that the guest feels that they were wanted and you enjoyed their company and you want them back. And that's why in the morning prayers, we say one of the biggest mitzvahs is escorting someone who passed away to their funeral, to their burial. So escorting, it seems, is a very powerful lesson in Torah, that it's not only about how you treat the person in your presence, but it's the goodbyes that tell it all. Sometimes it's how you say goodbye to someone where they know and feel, was I even wanted? Did they just do it because they needed a mitzvah? Or I happened to be there and they didn't want me to be embarrassed? By saying the warm goodbye is really underlying that you really wanted them there. And that really makes them feel like, oh my gosh, yeah, I was wanted. They enjoyed my company. They liked me. And that's the beauty of escorting someone to the door. Really is about escorting someone to the door. It's funny because whenever we have Shabbos guests, either my husband, or one of my kids always opens the door. Why? They can't open the door themselves. But that's the whole thing, that when your guests leave, you say, you know, here, enjoyed having you, and don't trip on my front step. So it's really a beautiful, beautiful thing, escorting, God forbid, somebody to their burial place is one of the biggest mitzvah. And the end of a mitzvah of hospitality is actually escorting the person to the door and thanking them for coming, because that really underlines the whole hospitality. It's always really about those final words. You know, I remember my brother told me he was teaching a class, and a guy raises his hand, and then he puts his hand down. He raises his hand, he puts his hand down, and my brother finally says in front of like a few hundred people, "Excuse me, ask your question, please." He says, I can't. He said, "No, please, I insist. I'm not going on my class till you ask your question." And the guy finally, a 50-year-old guy blurted out the question. And it happened to be a brilliant question. So after the class, my brother said to him, what happened? What, am I intimidating? Like, you didn't feel comfortable? He said, you know, when I was in second grade, I raised a hand to ask my teacher a question. And my teacher humiliated me in front of the whole class. That's a question? That's a question? What, you didn't read the book? That's a question? He says, I was horrified. I never asked the question again. He said, second grader. How old is a second grader? 7-year-old?
Oh my God.
He says, for me to ask a question took out everything out of me. Took out everything. So how we say something to somebody, I'm using that as an analogy in a kind, I don't know if it's exactly the same idea, is, so when that story happened, I have to just tell you the cute ending. So another guy comes over to my brother and says to him, I want to tell you my story. He says, I was also in second grade, and I asked the question, and the teacher said, stand up, Moshe. And he's like shaking in his boots. I'm sorry, did I insult you with my question? And the teacher said, come with me. And he took him to the principal's office in middle of class. And he said, Rabbi Schmid, Moshe, ask Rabbi Schmid your question. And he was like shaking, oy vey, what am I getting? I'm getting into trouble. And he says to the principal, isn't that a brilliant question? It's such a brilliant, beautiful question. I have to have the principal hear the question. So Moshe, the second guy, also in like 50-year-old, 60-year-old, tells my brother, and I haven't stopped asking questions since. So you have the second one who's petrified, and the second one who the teacher brought him to the principal to underline how beautiful and smart his question was. Maybe it wasn't even so beautiful and smart, but that's the teacher knew how to approach a child. So it's sometimes the words that really underline the whole meal, the whole event, the whole hachnasas orchim, which means having guests. And that's why the Torah emphasizes how he not only welcomed them into the tent, but he escorts them out of the tent and says, you know, I hope you come back one day. It's like a restaurant. If you want to have customers, how was the meal? You know, somebody have the owner walks around and you say to yourself, wow, he really cares about me as a customer. But remember, here Avram didn't charge. The only charge was you had to make a blessing. So let's see what happens when the angels come to the tent. Does anybody want to add something, say something? See something, say something. They have a new expression now. Margaret, you're on.
Yeah, you said something about the heat wave. Was that why the heat wave?
So the Torah says that it was a heat wave because God didn't want anybody to come to Avraham.
Oh,
yet.
Okay, but they did, but the angels came. Yeah.
Because he was healing. Because he was healing. God wanted to let him heal. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. So the three angels actually were disguised as men. And this is one of the sources of, do we believe in angels? We absolutely, do. Because you see in this story how three angels disguised as men come to the tent. There's two types of angels in the universe. There are angels disguised as men and women, human beings, and there are human beings who are really angels. I'll share a story soon about such an incident. So here's three angels disguised as men, and they come into the tent, and one of them, Angel Raphael, remember the three Ninja Turtles? Raphael, and you hear it in his name, comes to heal Abraham, because it's the third day after the circumcision. It's very painful. The angel Michael, comes to tell Avram and Sarah, guess what? You're finally going to have a child, a boy. And the last angel, Gabriel, comes to notify Abraham and Sarah that Sodom is going, and the 4 cities, Sodom and the 3 other cities, Sodom, Amorah, and the other 2 cities of corruption are going to be annihilated, totally annihilated. We're not going to go into it, but angels are given one task and one task only at a time. They never given 2 tasks. Thus 3 angels, each one had a different task. It's not like us, we can multitask. Angels can't multitask. It's a funny story that when God was giving out the jobs to the angels, so the angel of death, the Malach HaMavis, was very upset. You know the story? The Malach HaMavis said to God, it's not fair. Why do I get the worst job of all? I'm the one that's every time going to have to be the angel of death. Everyone's going to hate me. You know, could you give me another job? Give someone else that job? He didn't like his tasks. So God said to the angel of death, don't worry. No one is ever going to blame you. They're going to blame car accidents, illness, old age, heart attacks. They're never going to say, oh, you know, God sent the angel to take your life because it was time for you to go. No one's ever going to say that. People by nature, what happened? How did the person pass away? They were old. They had this, they had that. There's a car accident. No one's ever going to say, you know, God wanted you to go. No one's ever going to blame you. So don't worry, God says to the angel of death. You're never going to be blamed. You saw the show, Meet Joe Black? Very, very good show. If you want to watch a nice, it's light, but it's very good. It's about the angel of death comes to earth and comes to visit somebody, and he ends up taking him. But it's very good. It's with Anthony Hopkins. Very good show. So here in this Torah portion is the proof that we have angels.
Freida, I'm sorry. What was the first angel? The first angel was
Raphael.
And what was his task again? I'm sorry.
Healing. He's the angel of healing.
Healing.
Even the name you see, Raphael, Refuah, comes to heal. Comes from the name healing.
Great. Thank you.
My pleasure. So the 3 angels come into the tent, and Avram is preparing a whole feast for them. He's slaughtering a cow. And remember, 3 days after the circumcision, he's 99 years old. He's not exactly in the best of health. He doesn't say to his wife, Sarah, you know what? I'm not feeling well. I invited the guests. Go prepare the meal. Not at all. Remember, we spoke about the marriage. They had a beautiful marriage of equality. They both chipped into everything. And Sarah's actually not in the tent, that room of the tent. Remember, the tent was a mansion, a McMansion tent. It had 4 entrances. It was so huge. So listen what happens. The angels tell Abraham the following. I want to read it because it's so beautiful. Okay. Avram and Sarah were older people. And Sarah, her menstrual cycle had already ceased. And the angels say to them, you're going to have a child. You're going to have a baby. So Sarah overhears the conversation, and it says she was standing at the entrance of the tent, of the room of that tent, which was right behind the angel. And she heard that he said to Avram, you're going to have a child. So what's her reaction? Vatitzchak Sarah b'kirba leimar. And Sarah laughed. And she said, but Adonai is okay. My husband is old. My husband is older. She laughs and she says to herself, how could we have a child? My husband is older. So Rashi says, how could she laugh? How could she doubt? If God sends an angel, and she knew they were angels, remember, because remember when she was abducted by King Paro? In the last Torah portion, she saw the angel that was accompanying her. She knew it's the angel talking, so she laughed And she says, my husband is old. How can we have a baby? She doesn't say, you know what, I'm old. How could I have a baby? She says, my husband is old. You'll see why this is important. So Rashi jumps in and says she laughs. Could she possibly mock the words of God, the words of the angel? So the key word is here, Bekirba. Vatsachaka Bekirba. She didn't laugh and go, oh, don't tell me, a Baba Maisa, this is never going to happen. Inside, she laughed. She had Vatsachaka Bekirba. Subconsciously, she laughed inside, thinking, can I have a baby when my husband is so old? So it's not like she outwardly mocked God, God forbid, or the angel. Inwardly, Bekirba, that's how you know we have a subconscious, because Rashi says, Bekirba, subconsciously she laughed. Subconsciously she doubted it. And she said, my husband is old. She says to herself, really? Gonna have a baby with him? Now look what happens. So, now look what he said. So God says to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Is it really true that I will give birth even though I am old? So now God says to Abraham in the continuation of the conversation when the guests leave, how come Sarah laughed and said she's old? What does God say? He reverses it. What did Sarah really say? Who's old?
Abraham.
Abram. She didn't say it herself in the pasuk. So Rashi jumped. So who knows the answer? Why does God change what Sarah said? Sarah didn't say she was old. Sarah said, my husband is old. How could we have a baby? Rashi says something so powerful. That
God,
for sure. Go ahead.
God said that? God said that?
God says it.
I guess he didn't want him, Abraham, to hear that Sarah said that about him.
Brilliant. So God teaches us here something so powerful. Shalom bayis. Shalom bayis is peace between husband and wife. Peace in the home, which is based on the peace of the husband and the wife. Peaceful relations, peaceful harmony. God doesn't want it to be any tension. So God doesn't say to Abraham, you know what your wife was thinking? You're an old guy. He says, you know, your wife doubted it. She laughed. She thinks she's too old. God is saying to Abraham. So Rashi says for shalom bayis, you don't always have to tell it the way it is. You could sometimes leave out a few details. Sometimes we feel it's an obligation to straighten things out, not necessarily. If you're going to cause a dispute or disharmony in a home between husband and wife, don't always say what's on your mind. Sometimes hold back. It's a mitzvah not to say everything every time. You know?
We'll do it.
It's a mitzvah. I remember a story, a couple, somebody said something about a woman's husband, and the wife said to the lady later, why'd you say that to my husband? You caused us to have such a big argument. It's no mitzvah, even if you have knowledge and information, to go blab to the husband or wife about their spouse. Unless that's something detrimental, I don't know, something very dangerous. But here from God's actions, we learn about human relations. And this is God. So even God, how God talks to Abraham is so thought out. And we see it in the Torah. So this is a to me, one of the most beautiful lessons in Torah, how for marital harmony, how we speak is so important. Not to say something negative and show the spouse in a bad light.
She at home?
Like my daughters say, Ma, you never could complain to your mother about your husband. You know why? Your mother will never forget. You'll forget what you said, but your mother, she'll never forget. She'll hound him forever. You did that? You did that? My girl always laughed, Ma, we're never going to tell you. We'll tell someone else. We're not going to tell you because we know you're never going to forget it.
Right.
You'll bring it up.
Right.
So Sarah's 89. Avram is 99. A year later, like 9 months later, about to give birth to beautiful Yitzchak. What is he called? Batzachaka Sarah. Sarah laughed. What does she call her son? Yitzchak. The same root word, laughter, joy. She calls him after her reaction, which is a good reaction. She laughed. Again, she laughed in disbelief, but she also laughed with joy. It's joy. When you laugh, it's a joyous moment. So the son is named after that joy. They're giving birth to the first Jewish child. It's something amazing. She couldn't have children for many years. That's why she gave her handmaiden to Avram as a second wife, or whatever they called it in those days, a concubine, I don't know, whatever. So she has the first child, the heir to the future of the Jewish people, Isaac, Yitzchak. So it's a beautiful thing. So here we see two beautiful things: God visiting the sick, and God showing a tremendous sensitivity to marital harmony. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. So now comes the very story of Sodom. What's going on with Sodom? It's a very sad story there. There's 4 countries or 4 nations: Sodom, Amorite, Sodom and Amorah, and 2 more. And God says to Abraham, I have to destroy them. I'm going to annihilate them. Now remember, God is not annihilating the whole world. He's annihilating 4 cities, 4 corrupt neighboring areas near the Dead Sea. You'll see why it's important that it's near the Dead Sea. Avram debates with God, saying, no, I'm sure there's righteous people. If there's righteous people, God, in their merit, you save everyone else, which comes to show tzaddik is Said Olam. One righteous person can save an entire world. Because here Avram says to God, listen, if there's anybody righteous there, you got to save the whole place, because otherwise this person is penalized. God says there are no righteous people. Now, who lived in Sodom? Who remembers? When Avram went to Egypt with his wife, Lot, his nephew, Avram's uncle, Terach was Avram's father. Avram had an uncle Nachor, and Nachor had a son Lot. And when they ran away, or not when they ran away, when they left Haran, Lot, his nephew, came along. He came along. He saw what happened to his father. His father was burnt in the furnace because his father sided with Abraham, thinking if you side with Abraham, he'll also survive the furnace. But he didn't, because his father was not doing it only for altruistic reasons. He said to me, I'm going to see which way the bread is buttered. If Abraham survives the furnace, I'll side with Abraham. If he doesn't survive the furnace, I'll side with King Nimrod. So he saw Avram walks out of the furnace alive. He sides with Nimrod, and guess what happens? He gets burnt alive because his intentions were not. He's no Avraham. Anyway, Lot leaves with Avraham, and when they go down to Egypt, good morning. Let's see who's joining us. Welcome, whoever is on the class. Welcome, welcome. So he goes down with his uncle Avraham to Egypt because they need food, right? Remember, there's a hunger. And on the way back home, Lot allows his shepherds to pasture in private land and private plantations or private grasslands. So Avram's shepherds say, you're not allowed to have your sheep eat private property from private property. Move your sheep. They said, no, we disagree with you. So Avram says to Lot, you know what? If you can't follow the unethical laws of not stealing from other people's property, you go your way, I'll go my way. And they part ways. And where does Lot end up? In a gated community, so to speak. Sodom. Why does he go to Sodom? Sodom is very wealthy. It's very exclusive. They don't let any immigrants in. They don't let any immigrants in, no outsiders. To get into Sodom, you have to be something special in their minds, corrupt and special. Now, I just want to tell you what Sodom and Amorah were about, so you have to understand. It was, again, gated, very, very wealthy community. Think about the Stepford wives in one of those instances. They abhorred kindness. They abhorred charity. They abhorred hospitality. If, God forbid, your car broke down, even your Maserati, in front of their gated community, and you got in, they would torture you. They would rob you. If you let a guest into your house, you were arrested and put to death. And this is not me creating a science fiction picture. This is exactly who they were. And their constitution is thou shalt not shear, thou shalt not care, thou shalt not be hospitable. I'll give you a crazy story about them. If you ended up in their house and you were tall, they would give you a short bed and then chop off any part of you that went over the bed.
Oh, come on.
They were crazy. They were crazy, abusive people. So what was the straw that broke the camel's back? A poor man somehow made his way into Sodom, and there was a young girl who felt bad. So she gave the poor man a loaf of bread. They found out about it. They took her for clothes, they smeared her with honey, and they hung her near a beehive, and she brutally was killed that way. She died a painful, brutal death. And she cried out, and her cries reached the heavens. And God said, this is it. This is the straw that broke the camel's back. The cries of a young girl I cannot tolerate anymore. This is it. When I hear those cries, those tears for someone who helped a poor man, it's over. There's going to be total destruction. So God says to Avram, I'm doing this, it's over. And he sends angel Gabriel and another angel to go save Lot, his wife, and his children. Lot, by the way, was one of the chief justices of the community. He was a very lauded person in the community. Yeah. So when Lot, the angels come, pardon?
No, then he must have been just as bad.
Exactly. The truth is like this. Lot had the DNA of his uncle Abraham. In truth, he was he had the DNA of Abraham. But what happened when he comes to Sodom, he marries a woman from the Sodomites. And her name was Idit. And no one knows what her real name is, but her real name was Idit, I-D-I-T. It's not mentioned in the Torah, it's mentioned in the commentaries, in the Medrash. So Idit was his wife. She did not prescribe to the ways of Abraham and Sarah. She prescribed to the ways of the Sodomites, Sodom. Now, Lot is notified by two angels disguised as men who come to save him that there's going to be a destruction, and he has to leave, pack his bags with his wife and 4 daughters. 2 were married to men from Sodom, 2 were single girls. You'll see why this is important. The sons-in-law say to Lot, you think we're going to go with you? You, one of the Abraham people? Sound like Nazi Germany. Their true colors come out. They start pointing at him. You're one of them, are you? You're one of the followers of Abraham, are you? You're one of the Jews, are you? The Israelites. And they showed their true colors, and they refused to leave Sodom with Lot and his wife and their wives. They said, we're not leaving with you. We don't believe any of this baloney. Lot says, I'm telling you, there's going to be a destruction. You're not going to survive. And they began laughing, mocking him. And all of Sodom surrounded the house, not to let Lot leave with his wife and daughters. But of course, the angels step in, they blind everybody, and Lot, his 2 daughters and his wife escape and are leaving Sodom. And the angels say to Lot and his wife and daughters, there's one rule: do not look back at destruction. Don't look back. Right. It will be detrimental to you. Do not look back. Remember the story now, everybody? Yeah. Maybe you'll fill in the blanks. So what happens? Go ahead.
Oh, they look back and she turns into salt?
Who looks back?
The wife. The wife?
Yes. Lot's wife looks back and, say it again.
She turns into a pillar of salt?
Exactly. She turns into a pillar of salt. How was the destruction? Remember I said they were near the Dead Sea, which is salt. And God rained fire and sulfur and burned up the whole Sodom, Amorah, and the 2 other neighboring cities. Totally demolished. No one was left alive. Lot, his wife, and the 2 single girls were left alive. So now we have a bunch of questions here. Why did she look back? Didn't God through the angels say, don't look back, it'll be detrimental to you. Why does she look back? 2, why is she turned into a pillar of salt? And the plot thickens because where do you read anywhere really in the Torah that someone survives as a pillar of salt? Either they're killed, they're burnt, they die, they're buried. Where do you have anyone left alive in a sense, or not alive, but dead in a pillar of salt?
At the time.
Right? Next question. Why salt? And also, the Torah tells us that when you see the pillar of salt, when you see Lot's wife, you make a bracha, you make a blessing. And when else do we use salt? Who remembers? When is a ritual when we use salt? Anybody know?
Passover?
Passover, salt water, good. There, though, it's because we cried tears.
I thought.
No, that's fine. It's good. It's a very good. I didn't think of that one. But you know, when they had the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, and they brought offerings, it always had to be sprinkled with salt. If it wasn't sprinkled with salt, it wasn't permitted to be brought. And that's why Chal on Shabbos, we ever saw, we dip 3 times in salt. When you have a formal meal and you wash, people dip in salt, especially Shabbos. So the Torah says, why do we have salt on the offering? Because of Lot's wife. But she did a bad thing. She looked back. So you mean to tell me we pour salt on the offering in the Beit HaMikdash because of Lot's life? It's not even a positive connection. Usually it should be a positive connection, right? You did something good, and that's why we do salt. Here it seems like a negative connection. So what is the salt thing?
Well, was she looking back because she missed her 2 daughters?
Very good.
Yeah.
So the Torah analyzes, why did she look back? Because she's a mama, she's a mother. What you just said, Margaret, exactly one of the commentaries says. She was hoping that when her daughters who were married, the other 2 married daughters and husbands would see the sulfur and the fire, they would escape. Because remember, they were invited to escape in the merit of their father, right? Even though they were not righteous, God said Lot's entire family can be saved. So she was hoping maybe they followed, maybe they changed their mind, maybe they realized. But that's not what happens. Another reason she looked back, the commentaries say, is because she regretted a little bit that she left her mansion, her rose garden, her apple trees, her beautiful, luxurious clothing. Remember, she left with the what? Her little satchel. What did she take? What could you take when you're running away at a last minute notice? So she had a feeling of regret for her previous life. Even though she saw this fire and sulfur, but she regretted in her heart. She said, oh, look what I gave up. Now, the reason they were told not to look back is not, though they were saved, Lot's wife really didn't deserve to be saved. So God did not want her to revel in the destruction of her community. So she was said, don't look back. She really didn't deserve it. She only got saved because her husband Lot was Avram's nephew. God did a chesed. God did a kindness. So she looked back and she saw what was going on. God didn't want her to, in a sense, revel in the destruction of her community. There's many more reasons, but those will suffice for now. So one point, why salt? Turn into a pillar of cottage cheese. I don't know. Torah says that when people came, when Lot didn't listen to the edicts of his community, of his country, of his people, he invited guests secretly. She would be so upset and stingy, she wouldn't put salt on the food. And even the plot thickens at times. She would go around to the neighbors and say, anybody have a cup of salt? We have guests and I ran out of salt. That's how she would indict her husband indirectly. She would tell all the neighbors and they would go, see, he doesn't belong here. We have to penalize him. We have to get him because look what he's doing. He has guests. You're not allowed to have guests in Sodom. So this was her way of undermining her husband's load by telling the neighbor, oh, I need a little salt. I ran out of salt because we have to cook for them.
Wow.
So she didn't turn into chocolate fudge dessert. Because if she didn't give salt, I'm sure she didn't give them delicious dessert either. You know what I mean? So why did she turn into salt? Why did she turn into salt? Sorry. What's the significance of salt? And what's the connection that because of Lot's wife turning into salt, we sprinkle salt on the offerings in the temple to remind us of Lot's wife? So before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about the looking back. Here lies a very powerful, powerful message in life. The not looking back is teaching us a very important thing, insight. Many times we experience a tragedy, a destruction, an illness, a terrible life-altering experience. And we cannot move forward if we're always looking back. The key to moving forward in life, when you experience a destruction in your life, small destruction, large destruction, small hurdle, large hurdle, is not looking back. Sometimes people are stuck in their past experiences. You're stuck. You can't help it. If you only would have experienced what my parents did to me, to you, you would also remain stuck. If only you experienced what I experienced, you would never walk forward. People don't move forward because they're always looking back. They can't get out of the pit of darkness. It's not saying that it's easy to leave your destructive past, your abusive past, your harrowing past, your painful past, or your painful experience. But the key is you must look forward. It's not that you should forget. They're never going to forget that Sodom, their home, was completely burnt out, destroyed, annihilated. There's nothing left but the ground. They wouldn't forget. How could you forget that? But the looking back, not looking back, God is teaching Lot and his family, don't look back. In life, you got to look forward. You have to walk forward. You look back, you just get pulled back. So this is what the message is here. By God saying, don't look back, through the angel's message, God is explaining to us what happens when there's a destruction in your life. Should you stay there or should you move forward? Always move forward. Always move forward. This is what God is telling Lot, his wife, and his daughters. And Lot's wife can't move forward. She doesn't. And she turns into a pillar of salt. As a matter of fact, when I went to Israel, they showed us like a figure, and it looked like a woman, by the way. It absolutely looked like a woman, the shape of a woman. It's scary. Lest you think this is a metaphor. And it tasted salty. And you could understand why. It's right by the Dead Sea. Because what rained down? What destroyed Sodom and Amorah and the other two cities? Sulfur, salt, and fire. God created a concoction. And that's how they were destroyed. And my husband told me an interesting, when we were studying, he said that Sodom was built on a rock and it flipped over and everybody was, that's it, gone. My husband said, one of the commentaries explains how. Okay, so now salt. So you say, look, salt was the mineral nearby and it rained down, it covered her in salt. Okay, very nice. I could take that, right? Can we accept that? But let's go deeper. You know, we always have to go deeper here, right? It's one of my problems. No, I'll tell you what it is. There's something called pardes, which means garden. In the Torah, there's 4 levels of study. Pei of pardes means pshat, literal explanation. Reish comes from the word remez, hints. The Torah hints to what happened. Doesn't tell you, but it hints to what happened. Dalet is drash, is the medrash, interesting insights. And samach, the last letter, so the hidden meaning, the hidden secrets of the Torah, which for that we bring Kabbalah, mysticism, and so on. So we can never just learn literal here. We have to do parties. We have to go into the garden. Because when you study Torah from 4 directions, you go into a garden. It opens up the beautiful scent and the beautiful florals of the universe. That's what it is, paradise, garden. So think of Torah study as a garden, Basi lagani achaisi kala. Come into my garden, my daughter, my sister, my bride. It's a beautiful discourse. Okay, so salt. What's salt? Margaret, Jane, you're chefs. I know Margaret is a chef. Jane, that's only us 3 friends. I'll tell you, Margaret, for my birthday, bought me an Instapot. Now, me with an Instapot is like me flying a helicopter. On my table, and I'm like, what do you do? And I start cooking, and I'm scared of being exploded in the steam. And I call my husband to shut it off, because in my mind, when you release the steam, there's going to be an explosion.
Me too.
With the Instapot. Now the plot thickens. Margaret came to me to cook with me in the Instapot. Then she sent me a kosher Instapot. Margaret is determined that I learned
kosher recipe book. Yeah, right.
Oh,
Okay.
wow. Oh, Margaret, come on over.
Yeah.
So Margaret and Jay, tell me why we need salt in our lives.
Well, it brings out the flavor.
Right.
Very
Unlocks the flavor. Unlocks the flavor.
What happens if you oversalt?
But you can't oversalt it, because then it becomes too salty and it's not good for you. It's not healthy.
And you can't even eat it.
Yeah.
Like my kid once said, Ma, did you use salt? I said, yeah, a little bit. They said, a little bit?
Yeah.
So anyway, so story with a Rebbe that was a famous Rebbe was coming to visit this other Rebbe. So the family went wild. They were cooking up a Shabbos meal, and they put up the chicken soup. And the Rebbe said, my wife always tends to undersalt. Let me put in a little salt. The daughter comes in the kitchen and says, we're having this extremely famous Rebbe, the scholar. We better make sure there's enough salt. She puts in salt. The mother, the wife, comes in and she says, I tend to undersalt. Let me put in a little extra salt this time. Okay. Comes to the meal, and they serve the soup, and the whole family looks at each other, and they can't believe it. The taste is horrible. It's like salt with water. You can't eat it. Now the guest doesn't want to insult anybody, so he eats the soup, because he's thinking, why should I insult the Rebbe who invited me? He figured out that it was a salty situation. So the guest says to the host, why aren't you eating? He says, the question is not why I'm not eating. Question is, why are you eating? Eating, but why did you eat? So a little humor. So salt can either bring out flavor, enhance, or it could destroy the meal. It could be, if it's too salty, isn't it good? You can't eat it. So salt has that quality. So salt, the Torah explains, is our conscience. It's good to have a conscience. It's good to feel guilty when you do something wrong, say something wrong, and make amends. That's what brings you to sometimes prevent yourself from doing something. You have a conscience. And sometimes guilt is healthy. What's Jewish Alzheimer's? You forget everything but the guilt. We, especially Jewish mothers, were always feeling guilty. The bridge collapsed, it's my fault. My son didn't pass the test, it's my fault. We blame ourselves for everything. My mother always says, Freida, what don't you feel guilty about? Because I'm always feeling guilty about this and guilty about that. So salt equals conscience and guilt. It's good to have some guilt, feeling of guilt, and it's good to have a conscience. This is what makes us moral, ethical people. We care, it hurts us when we see some travesty or crime or what's another word? We see something that should not be so. That's why Jews are always running across the universe saving people. Israel has helicopters and patrols that go to every country when there's any catastrophe, they go to help, even if they don't know the people. It's our conscience, it's the Yiddish conscience. But if you have too much guilt that holds you back in life, and too much of a conscience where you can't ever do anything because, oh my gosh, I'm so guilty. That's also not good. That's also not good. That's not good. So the connection of salt to the offering is, when does a person bring an offering? When you did a sin, when you committed a sin, when you're impure, you needed purity. And if you take the Hebrew letters of salt, which is melech, which means king, but also means salt, you can change it around. It becomes lechem, bread. Salt and bread, bread and salt go together. And lechem chamal, 1 minute, hold on. Machal, forgiveness. An offering is a form of forgiveness. And what's the Hebrew word for offering? Carbon. How do you get closer to God? By bringing an offering, a carbon. Carbon comes from the word close. So salt brings us closer to God. When a person has a conscience, when you feel guilty, when you repent and atone, or help someone because you're saying, well, oh my gosh, I can't let that go by. That's a good thing. That brings you closer to God. Better. So salt in moderation is a good thing. So it's not that the connection to Lot's wife, that she turned into salt, is a negative. When we see salt, we say a blessing, because salt allows us to get closer to God. It's guilt, it's conscience. On the other hand, too much salt, too much guilt, too much conscience is destructive. If you're constantly making your children feel guilty, your students feel guilty, your friends feel guilty. You didn't call me, you didn't write to me, you didn't invite me, you didn't take me, you didn't buy me. And you're always making everyone feel guilty, and you're loading on the guilt. It's terrible, it's destructive. People who are always guilty or feeling guilty or attacking everyone else and making them feel guilty, you can't move on in life. It's not it's not healthy. It's over salting the food. So the lesson here is that salt in moderation is a very healthy thing, but overdo it, it's a destructive thing. So that's the message of the salt. And that's why when it says, when you put salt on the carbon, you remember what happened to Lot's wife. So salt, it's a salty situation.
What's carbon again?
Carbon comes from the word karov, closeness.
Oh.
When the Jewish people brought offerings to God, it brought them closer to God. You're giving the gift to God. And God would send the fire down and burn up the offering, the barbecue pit, and the Kohanim would get to take home the delicious roasted meat that was not burnt to the family. Because sometimes people, one woman was saying, whoa, it's so vicious. They took animals, they burnt it. No. Every time you roast a burger on your grill, that's the same thing was going on in the Beit HaMikdash. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't inhumane. It was roasting on the grill, but God brought the fire. And they got to take home the delicacies from that's what they got to take home. The Kohanim, this was their sustenance. They got home delicious rotisserie chicken. It was beautiful. Okay. So now we have only a few minutes, but I want to end off. Should I end off with the sacrifice of Isaac, or should I end off with what happens with Lot and his daughters, the incestuous relationship? What's more?
Wow.
Lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then it comes to something that's very controversial, but very, very powerful. I hope I could do it justice. I did talk about this a couple of times because there's 4 other stories in the Torah that are connected, but this is the pivotal beginning. So something very, very, again, remember it's in the Torah. So if it's in the Torah, it's not hidden. It's not a secret. God could have taken it out. So now Lot and his 2 daughters are wandering and they end up in a cave. And in the mind of Lot and his daughters, without internet, newspapers, and telephones, what happened here? Was only Sodom and Amorah and the other 2 cities destroyed? In their mind, it was another flood. In their mind, the entire world had now been destroyed.
Okay.
So in their mind is we are 3 people in an empty world. There's nothing left here. There's nothing left. We are the beginning and the end of the world. God destroyed everybody. It wasn't only Sodom, Amorah, and the surrounding. So the older daughter says to the second daughter, what are we going to do? There's nothing left in this universe. It's us three. We need to procreate. So the older daughter makes wine or has wine from her escape. I don't know if they schlepped it along, and she gets low drunk, and she has relationship with him, and she gets pregnant. And 9 months later, she gives birth to a child, and she calls him Moav, from my father. The next night, going back, the second daughter does the same thing. She gets her father drunk, she has relations with him, and 9 months later, she gives birth to a son, and she calls him Ammon, from my father, or from my nation. My nation. Who comes from Moab? Fast forward. Remember, who was a Moabite princess who marries the leader of the Jewish people? She converts to Judaism. She leaves her people. Ruth, the book of Ruth. Remember, she's a Moabite princess. She marries Boaz, and they give birth 2 generations later to King David, the first king of the Jewish people. So Ruth is a descendant of the relationship of Lot and his daughter, Moab.
Wow.
Now we don't have time to finish, but I'm gonna just give you a tidbit. Look, God lauds Lot's 2 daughters. God praises them for their self-sacrifice in bringing children into the world, though it was incestuous. But remember, this is before the giving of the Torah. So it wasn't against the law, so to speak, but yeah, it wasn't done exactly. Now remember, they 2 girls have no interest in their father. It's only because they want to populate the world, and God knows what's in their heart.
Right.
God lauds them and says, from them will come the king of Israel. And he does. And it's connected with 2 more stories of these kind of situations, not incest, but you have the story of Yehuda and Tamar. Remember Judah, one of the sons of Jacob, he has a relationship with his daughter-in-law, and they give birth to Peretz, the twins, and whatever. From then, King David, Ruth, okay, Boaz is the grandson from there. And then you have the whole story of King David, where King David's mother, who's married to his father, is accused of adultery, even though she didn't. And that we'll discuss later. So there's 4 stories that create a very controversial, cryptic view of that the King David, the first king of the Jewish people, comes from these very weird relationships, intimate relationships. So say, why didn't God choose a more lily pure Jewish family, without questions, without controversy, without explanations, to be the lineage of King David, aristocracy?
Mm-hmm.
And there you have to go into Kabbalah, because it's not a simple thing. When God created the universe, and Adam and Chava actualized negativity by going against the will of God and eating from the tree of knowledge, and they created negative energy in the world, that energy, that negativity opposes goodness and opposes light. So when something very light, very powerful has to come into the universe, there's an opposition to it. So God had to sneak in the seed of King David, the seeing, and by the way, who's going to come from that dynasty? Mashiach. The King Mashiach is a descendant of King David. We don't know who it is, but it's from that lineage, from the same lineage, our future king. So how does God sneak in a light so powerful without the negative energy pushing it down, demolishing it, attacking it? Put it in a place no one will believe. You have a diamond. Remember that show about the diamond? He finds a huge diamond, he hides it between his toe, and he escapes. It's a whole very good movie about this giant diamond, the largest diamond ever to be mined. You have to put it in a place no one's going to look. How do you hide the light? You put it, what, from Lot? It's going to come King David? Never there. The negative energy, the evil inclination, I don't want to use the word Satan, but the negative energy will not look in Lot's family, will not fast forward, will not look at Ruth, the Moabite convert princess who married Boaz. No. From there is not going to come the king. The king is going to come from a very lily white, pure aristocracy Jewish family that doesn't have any skeletons in the closet. It's going to be from someone who was brought up with a silver spoon in his mouth. That's going to be our king of Israel. No, no, no. The king of Israel comes from an illicit relationship, an incestuous relationship. Fast forward, another relationship that's questionable, another relationship that's questionable. And even King David's own father thought that his wife, who's pregnant, is pregnant with another man. He didn't realize it was him because his wife had to disguise herself because she knew that there had to be a birth of a king from her and her husband. So she disguised herself and he didn't know it was her. So, and we'll discuss those stories as we come to it. So again, God, the greatest light in the universe, the Kabbalah explains, sometimes has to come disguised in a plain brown package. You'll never look, you'll never suspect that your $10,000 Chanel bag came in an unmarked box. You can expect a horse and buggy to drive up and deliver this bag to you that you've been saving up for. You never suspect that light can sometimes come from the darkest place. That the biggest diamond can come from the dirtiest rock formation. You never suspect. You always think, where do diamonds come from? Tiffany's, Van Beers, that's where diamonds come from. The back room, the safe. We never believe. So this is the story of the universe, that the greatest light sometimes emerges from the biggest darkness. That's the power. And now one more tidbit. Who should be a king of Israel? Someone who never suffered, someone who never experienced pain, ostracization, what's the word?
Being ostracized.
Being ostracized, someone who never heard a cry, a wail, someone who never had to work for himself or herself. God did not want a king that doesn't have empathy and compassion for his people. King David was ostracized by his brother, isolated from his brother, pushed aside as an illegitimate son. And he knew what pain is. He knew what it means to be left out. He knew what it felt to be hurt. That's the kind of king you want running your country and your people. Someone who understands that it's not easy to be a Jew, that it's not easy to overcome challenges sometimes. That's who you want as the king of Israel. Someone like Lot's daughter who said, you know what, we need to do what we need to do. We have a mission. It's going to be hard for us to do this, but we're going to do it because this is what God wants from us. And so on and so forth as we go to the stories. The Moabite princess Ruth, why couldn't she go back to her father, to her rich palace? She insisted on going with her penniless, poor, widowed mother-in-law and remain Jewish. She could have gone back and said, you know what, I'm done with the conversion business. Life has been horrible for me. I'm going back to the palace. It is these type of people that God wants his king to come from. People who have an inner strength and a light that shines through darkness. This is who God wants for us. And that's why also in the Torah it says a mitzvah. You have to be good to the convert. You have to be good to the widow. You have to be good to the orphan. Isn't it common sense? No, it's not such common sense. We tend to ostracize, alienate, push away those that are not from our elite group. It's the nature of it. We like to be with those who are, oh my gosh, do you know her husband? He manages $5 billion in the hedge fund. He can be a charlatan, a ganef, but he's 5 million hedge fund. Woo, whoopee-doo. That's who I want to be friends with. Really? So the Torah is teaching us here so many powerful messages. Maybe we should next week touch upon the sacrifice of Isaac, because therein is a very powerful thing. So we'll conclude with this. I'm going to conclude with a little story. So there's a very pious Jew. He has to marry off his daughter. He has no money. He's penniless. Where's he going to get money? He's walking. He sees a little shuk selling a lottery ticket. $1 he has for a lottery ticket. So he buys a lottery ticket. Maybe I'll win. We'll probably not, but you never know. If I win, it's all taken care of. Very good. word gets out in the town that this very nice guy, this very righteous guy bought a lottery ticket. There's a ganef in town, there's a thief. He also bought a lottery ticket. He's a swindler, he's a thief. If he could rob you of your last nickel, he'll rob you of your last nickel. He doesn't even know the meaning of truth. He has swindled so many people in the community. He has a reputation as the local ganef, which means a local thief. He says to himself, that Jew who bought the lottery ticket, he's an angel. He's a sweetheart. He's beloved by everyone. God is going to make him win, for sure. So what am I going to do? I'm going to pickpocket his ticket and give him my ticket. Once I have his ticket, I'll be the winner. Because God is going to pick only a righteous guy to make. He's not going to pick me to win. So that he comes to shul, and when he has the right moment, he switches his lottery ticket with the righteous guy's lottery ticket. Very good. The next week, they announced the winner. Who won? The righteous Jew. He picks out his lottery ticket. They look at the numbers. You're the winner. The community can't believe it. Now the guy is set for life. He can marry off all of his children with this money. The thief is very upset. Why? That was really his lottery ticket, right? He swapped them. So he calls the guy to the rabbinical court and he puts his case. Now the head of the rabbinical court was a very famous scholar. Forgot his name. So the ganef, the thief, says to the rabbinical court, you know I'm a thief. And I thought he would win, his ticket would win. So I pickpocketed his ticket and I swapped the tickets. It's really my ticket that won. So I demand the money. But this is a rabbinical court, you have to do what's right. So the head of the rabbinical court takes a look at the ganef. He says, no. Declined. I rule in favor of the other man, the righteous man. He didn't say righteous man, but the other guy. Why? What's the cheshbon? What's the analysis of the judge? He didn't win because he didn't win the lottery because he had your numbers. He won the lottery because God wanted him to win the lottery. It didn't matter what ticket he would have. Whatever ticket this man would have, he would win the lottery. God does not distribute wealth based on our understanding. Oh, the numbers, my numbers were really his numbers. That's why he won. He didn't win because he had your numbers. He didn't win because he had his numbers. He won because God wanted him to win. So it would not matter whose ticket he had. It wouldn't matter if he had your ticket, his grandmother's ticket, his uncle's ticket. It wouldn't matter. God distributes wealth the way God wants to distribute wealth. God distributes kindness the way God wants to distribute kindness. So when you buy your lottery ticket, ladies and gents, know that if you're meant to win, you'll win. It doesn't matter what numbers you really have. If God wants you to win, you'll win. And the secret to winning is being a partner with God. And you're a partner with God. God says, that's the place I'm going to give because I know they're going to share it. So if God knows you're a partner, you definitely will get the wealth. So I hope I'm going to run and buy a lottery ticket. I always tell my husband, if we win, we have to give the first 10 or 15% based on the law, Jewish law, to charity right away. The first check has to go to charity because otherwise, why did God make us win? You know, then we could buy everything we need. And I have a whole list. I already put up my list. So my husband,
right.
Anyway, so does anybody want to add anything or say anything as we conclude the class today?